I'm here today to defend a convicted criminal, a console that has been mocked, dismissed, and left in the shadow of its flashy, polygonal rival for nearly 3 decades. The defendant? The Sega Saturn. The charge? Being a failure. The prosecution, pretty much the entire internet, says it was too expensive, had no games, couldn't do 3D, and killed Sega's hardware business. They say the PlayStation won because it was simply better. But I have spent weeks digging through the evidence. I've interviewed the code, the controllers, the library, and what I found is not a failure. It's a misunderstood masterpiece, buried under a mountain of playground rumors and corporate spin. So with the court's permission, that's you, the viewer, I will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are all wrong about the Sega Saturn. Let's start with the most damning piece of evidence, the price. May 1995, Sega Saturn launches in North America at a shocking $399, while the PlayStation debuts at $299. Case closed, right? Sega was greedy and clueless. Except that's not the whole story. The Saturn wasn't a simple box. It was an arcade monster squeezed into a home console. That $399 wasn't a markup for profit. Sega was barely breaking even. The hardware was dense, expensive, and over-engineered for what developers initially needed. That same over-engineering let the Saturn do something the PlayStation physically could not. Perfect, pixel-perfect 2D. The high price was a mistake in marketing, not a mistake in hardware. You were paying for a future that, tragically, most people never got to see. The second charge. The Saturn can't do 3D. The prosecution will show you Daytona, USA at launch with pop-ins so bad you can see tomorrow's weather. They will show you muddy textures and blocky models. Yes, the Saturn was a nightmare to code 3D for because it used quadrilaterals, not triangles, and had no modern, dedicated GPU. It forced developers to juggle 2 CPUs and a DSP manually, and it was, by all accounts, a pain. But here's the argument you have not heard. The Saturn did the 3D beautifully when developers spoke its bizarre language. Look at Virtua Fighter 2 running at 704 by 480 with flat shaded polygons that looked cleaner than textured PlayStation games. Knights delivered fluid open flight on a scale not matched until much later. The Saturn's 3D was not worse, it was different, with a crisp arcade faithful look that PlayStation's muddy textures could not touch. The problem was not capability, it was accessibility. And only Sega house teams like AM2 were given the keys to the kingdom. Now every Saturn fan says, but the library, the hidden gems. And the prosecution rolls their eyes and says, hidden for a reason. So let's talk about the library honestly. The Saturn didn't have a mainline Sonic game, it didn't have a Final Fantasy VII killer, it didn't have the massive third-party support. That part is true, but what it did have was a treasure trove of some of the most creative, bizarre, and technically brilliant games of the generation, most of which never left Japan. The Saturn became a cult legend because it was the last console where giant publishers took wild risks. Dragon Force mixed RTS and RPG combat like nothing else. Guardian Heroes was a multi-plane beat-em-up with branching storylines. Radiant Silvergun is still one of the greatest shooters ever made. And the Saturn was a 2D powerhouse at a time when Sony actively rejected 2D games. So if you loved fighting games, if you loved shoot-em-ups, if you loved RPGs, the Saturn was not a failure. It was paradise. Exhibit D, the controller. The internet calls it a bloated boomerang. I call it the best fighting game pad ever made. That D-pad had perfect 8-way motion, clicky, and responsive. 6 face buttons, arranged perfectly for Street Fighter Alpha 2, which ran arcade perfect on this machine. The shoulder buttons had travel. The whole thing felt substantial. The PlayStation controller gave you a mushy split D-pad and 4 face buttons until the DualShock showed up years later. For a console that was secretly the king of 2D fighters, this wasn't just a controller. It was a scalpel. But I have to present one piece of damning evidence myself. The Saturn didn't fail because of hardware. It failed because of Sega's own corporate civil war. The Japanese leadership and the American branch fought over everything, from the chipset to the launch strategy. The infamous surprise E3 launch in 1995, where Sega announced the Saturn was available right now at select retailers without telling most of their retail partners. That burned bridges, that alienated developers. That's what killed the Saturn, not the games, not the price, not the 3D. We judge the Saturn by its sales numbers and its chaotic life. But I ask you, judge it by the experience, by the nights lost in nights, by the majestic melancholy skies of Panzer Dragoon, by the sheer defiant weirdness of a machine that refused to play by the rules. The Saturn wasn't a failure. It was a brilliant, beautiful, misunderstood swan song for an era of gaming that valued spirit over market share. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the court of public opinion has convicted this console for too long. It's time to overturn that verdict. If you've never played a Saturn, I challenge you to find one, emulate one, just experience its soul. And if you grew up with one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I now rest my case. The defendant is not guilty. But the comments section is now in session. I want your verdict. Was the Saturn a misunderstood triumph or a deserved failure? Defend your position. Tag a friend who still swears by the Genesis and refuses to believe Sega ever made another console. Share this video so we can give this machine the trial it always deserved. Subscribe for more retro defenses. And remember, the truth is always hiding in the hardware. What console should I defend next?